My name is Eleanor, I'm 73 years old, and my son took a luxury trip to California with his wife, leaving me on our Montana ranch to rot. Before I tell you what my cold-blooded answer was that left him speechless, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. For 50 years this Montana ranch hasn't just been my home. It's been my lifeblood, my sweat, my tears, my entire world. And for the last 24 hours it's been silent. The kind of oppressive quiet that sinks into your bones, the kind that follows a storm. Yesterday that storm was my son, Ethan, and his wife Jessica, packing their designer suitcases into their shiny SUV. They were off to Santa Barbara, a place I'd only ever seen on postcards, leaving me behind with a pat on the shoulder and a casual, "Someone's got to look after the place, Mom." The dust from their tires had barely settled before the silence took over. But just now that silence was shattered. The old rotary phone on the kitchen wall, the one my late husband installed decades ago, rang with a shrillness that cut right through me. My hand was steady as I picked it up. I knew who it was. I'd been waiting. "Mom." Ethan's voice wasn't his usual calm, collected tone. It was high-pitched, cracking with panic. "Mom, what the hell is going on with the cards?" I took a slow breath, looking out the window at the endless blue sky. "I don't know what you mean, Ethan. Don't play dumb with me," he shrieked. And I could hear Jessica's hysterical sobbing in the background. "None of them are working. Not the credit cards, not the debit card. Nothing. They're all declined. We're stranded here, Mom. We can't pay the hotel bill. We can't even buy a bottle of water." I pictured them there, in their 5-star resort, surrounded by palm trees and entitlement, their perfect vacation crumbling around them. For a split second, a flicker of the old maternal instinct tried to surface, the urge to fix his problems like I always had. But I stomped it out. That woman was gone. "It must be a system error," he rambled on, his voice getting more desperate by the second. "You need to call the bank. Right now, Mom. Tell them to fix this." I let the silence stretch, savoring it. I could hear the waves crashing on a California beach through his phone, a world away from the quiet hum of my refrigerator. "Eleanor," I said, and the sound of my own first name, spoken with such firmness, felt foreign and powerful. "There is no system error." A pause. A heavy, loaded silence filled with confusion. What are you talking about?" I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap, the sound of running water grounding me. "I mean, it's not a mistake, Ethan. I'm the one who did it." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't confusion. It was pure, unadulterated shock. I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding to a halt. You what?" he stammered. "I froze the accounts," I stated, my voice as cold and clear as a Montana winter morning. "All of them. I canceled the cards. Every single one." I could hear him breathing short, sharp gasps of disbelief. Jessica's crying turned into a full-blown wail. "Why?" he finally whispered, the single word dripping with a fury he was trying to contain. "Why would you do that to us?" I leaned against the counter, the cool formica a comfort against my back. I looked at the framed photo on the wall, me, my husband, and a 10-year-old Ethan, all smiling, a family that no longer existed. "You should know why, Ethan," I said softly, letting the weight of my words hang in the air between Montana and California. And then I hung up. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with a definitive click. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. For the first time in a long time, I felt a profound sense of calm. I stood there in my kitchen, the silence returning, but this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the quiet before my own storm, the one I was about to unleash. His silence on the phone had been more telling than all his screaming. It was the silence of a man caught red-handed. He had no idea this was just the beginning of his nightmare. And he certainly had no idea that I already knew everything. My knowledge of their betrayal didn't come to me in a single dramatic flash. It wasn't a sudden bolt of lightning. No, it was a slow, creeping poison that had started to seep into my life 3 days earlier, right here on this porch, in the golden light of a late Montana afternoon. My dearest friend Carol had come over for our afternoon sweet tea. A ritual we'd kept for 30 years, through marriages, births, and funerals. She's a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall. But she has the heart of a grizzly bear and eyes that don't miss a single thing. She sat in the rocker that used to be my husband Robert's, her small hands wrapped around the warm mug I'd set out for her. She was unusually quiet, just staring out towards the gravelly range mountains, their peaks already dusted with the promise of an early autumn snow. The silence stretched, filled only by the buzzing of a lazy bee and the creak of her chair. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was heavy. "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, and she didn't look at me. That's how I knew it was serious. "I have to tell you something. And Lord knows I wish I didn't. You're not going to like it." I stopped shelling the peas I just picked from the garden, my fingers suddenly stiff and clumsy. A sense of dread, cold and heavy as a river stone, settled deep in my stomach. I've lived long enough to know that conversations starting like that never end well. "What is it, Carol? Just say it plain." She took a shaky breath. "I was in town yesterday," she began, choosing her words with the care of someone walking through a minefield. "I had to go to Mr. Miller's law office. Just updating some things on my own will, you know how it is. Getting my affairs in order." She paused and finally turned to look at me, her kind face etched with worry. While I was in the waiting room, Jessica came in. She was on her cell phone, talking loud like she owned the place, strutting around in those high heels that have no business on a dusty street in our town. She didn't see me. I was tucked away in the corner. My knuckles went white around the peapod I was holding. Jessica at a lawyer's office? It felt wrong, like seeing a wolf in a sheep pen. She hated coming into town unless it was for the fancy salon. "She was talking to her mother, Sharon," Carol continued, her voice filled with a quiet fury on my behalf. "And she was laughing, Al. That high, tinkling laugh of hers. She said, and I quote, 'It's almost a done deal, Mom. We found a buyer. A developer from California who wants to turn this whole valley into a luxury golf resort.'" The world tilted on its axis. The gentle breeze suddenly felt like an icy wind. The bowl of peas slipped from my lap, scattering like little green marbles across the wooden planks of the porch. A buyer? For my home? For the land my grandfather homesteaded? It was unthinkable. Are you sure that's what she said?" I whispered, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form the words. "As sure as the sun rises, Eleanor," Carol said, her own voice firm now. "And it gets worse. She told her mother that they just needed you to sign one last batch of insurance papers to finalize the transfer of ownership. And then she laughed again and she said, 'She won't even read them. The old dear will just sign wherever I point. She trusts Ethan completely.'" The casual cruelty of it, the absolute certainty in my gullibility, it was like a physical punch to the gut. But Carol wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes dark with the awfulness of what she had to say next. "Then she said something else," she said, her voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear. "She told Sharon they'd already picked out the nicest retirement home for you, just outside of Billings. She said the down payment from the sale of the ranch would cover the first few years of your custody and care. And by then, well, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. A retirement home. A place to be put away, forgotten, medicated into a quiet stupor while they lived lavishly off the money from my life's work. My inheritance from my parents, the home I built with Robert, the soil I had tilled with my own 2 hands until they were raw and cracked. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an erasure. They were trying to erase me from my own life, to write me out of my own story. Suddenly, a memory from last week surfaced, one I dismissed at the time as Jessica just being, well, Jessica. She had insisted on reorganizing my medicine cabinet. She clucked her tongue, moving my pill bottles around with her perfectly manicured fingers. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd said with that sickly sweet smile plastered on her face. "You get so forgetful sometimes. I just worry you'll take the wrong thing. Let me set it all up for you so it's simple." At the time, I thought it was an annoying, condescending but ultimately well-intentioned gesture. Now I saw it for what it was. It was an act. It was gaslighting. She wasn't helping me. She was building a case against me. She was planting the seeds, telling a story to anyone who would listen that I was losing my mind, that I was a danger to myself. I stood up from my chair, my body shaking with a rage so profound it scared me. This wasn't just about a vacation. This wasn't just about money. This was a coup, a long, slow, calculated takeover. All the whispered phone calls that stopped the moment I entered a room. all the important-looking envelopes that were whisked out of sight. It was all part of their disgusting plan. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a hideous mosaic of deceit. But as the horror washed over me, I remembered another small, seemingly insignificant detail that I had pushed aside. A detail from about a month ago, something Ethan had said in passing as we were fixing a fence line. And now recalling it, my blood ran absolutely cold. "The folder," I said, my voice hoarse and unfamiliar to my own ears. "Carol, the green folder." Carol looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What green folder, honey? What are you talking about?" My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even seen before. A few months back, maybe 3, Jessica came over one afternoon. She was in a whirlwind, said she had an appointment at the salon and couldn't be late. She had this plain green folder stuffed with papers. She said it was just routine updates for the ranch insurance and some new tax forms the accountant needed. She spread them out on the kitchen table, all smiles and efficiency. My own words tasted like ash in my mouth. She just pointed with that long red fingernail of hers. "Sign here, here, and here, Eleanor. It's all standard stuff." Ethan already looked it over. And like a fool, like a trusting mother who couldn't imagine her own child would ever harm her, I had signed. I didn't even put on my reading glasses. I just saw the love of my son in her face and I signed my name on the dotted lines. We rushed inside, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through. I tore through the old roll-top desk in the study, a piece of furniture that had been in my family for a century. My hands were frantic, scattering old receipts, letters from my late husband, pictures of Ethan as a boy. And then I saw it tucked away in the back, almost hidden. A plain green folder. It felt cold to the touch. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and placed it on the polished wood of the desk. Carol, ever the practical one, pulled her reading glasses from her purse and sat down beside me, her presence a small, solid comfort in my swirling chaos. She opened the folder, and we both stared at the dense pages of legal jargon. My eyes swam over the words, unable to focus. It was all a blur of whereas and herebys. But Carol's finger, small and wrinkled but steady as a rock, slowly traced a line of text on the 3rd page. She didn't have to say a word. Her sharp intake of breath was enough. I leaned in, forcing my eyes to focus, and read the sentence her finger was resting on. "Hereby grants full and irrevocable power of attorney to Ethan Cole Miller for the management, liquidation and transfer of all real estate and financial assets, including but not limited to bank accounts, investment portfolios and property deeds, held by Eleanor May Miller." Irrevocable. The word felt like a death sentence. It echoed in the silent room. I had not only given him permission to manage my affairs, I had given him the legal power to sell my home, drain my bank accounts, and leave me with nothing. I had signed my own eviction notice. I sank into the chair, the room spinning around me. I had signed away my life, my home, my entire legacy. It was all there, in black and white, signed with my own trusting, foolish hand. "Oh, honey," Carol whispered, her hand finding mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "Those dirty, rotten snakes." And then another memory, another piece of their cruel puzzle, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The chickens. My prize-winning flock of buff Orpingtons. Just last week, half of them had gotten violently ill. I'd spent days and hundreds of dollars at the vet, nursing them back to health, heartbroken, confused about what could have caused it. The vet had been baffled. Ethan had been the one to buy the feed that week because I'd put my back out mucking out the barn. He'd come home with a different brand, a cheaper one. "Sorry, Mom," he'd said, his face a perfect mask of apology. They were out of the usual stuff. It was all they had. I really messed up. I'd been so preoccupied with the sick birds. I just accepted his excuse without a second thought. But it wasn't a mistake. I saw that now. It was sabotage. They were creating problems, small fires for me to put out, to make me feel overwhelmed, to support their narrative that I couldn't handle the ranch on my own anymore. It was a slow, deliberate campaign to break me down, to make me feel helpless and incompetent. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to crush my spirit, to dismantle my confidence piece by piece until I was a shell of myself, grateful to be carted off to some sterile room to live out my final days. They wanted me to believe I needed them. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot with shame and fury. I cried for a moment, for the naive old woman who had trusted so blindly. I cried for the mother who had raised a son capable of such a monstrous, calculated betrayal. But then the tears stopped. Just like that. Something inside me shifted. The grief and the shock burned away, and what was left was cold, hard, and sharp as a shard of glass. It was rage. A pure, cleansing rage that filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I had spent my life being a caretaker, a peacemaker, a gentle soul. That woman was gone. She had signed her own death warrant in that green folder. But a new woman was rising from her ashes. They thought they were dealing with a frail old lady. They thought they had already won. They were about to find out just how devastatingly wrong they were. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them one. And I knew exactly where my first strike would land. The next morning, Carol and I were in my old Ford pickup, rattling down the highway towards town before the sun had even cleared the mountains. There was no more time for tears or shock. It was time for action. My mind, which had been foggy with grief the night before, was now crystal clear, focused with a singular cold purpose. Our first stop was the First Montana Bank. It's a small local bank where I'd been a customer since I was a girl opening my first savings account with birthday money. The manager, a young woman named Sarah whose mother I'd gone to school with, ushered us into her office with a look of profound relief on her face. "Eleanor, thank goodness you came in," she said, closing the door and lowering her voice. "Frankly, we've been worried sick. I was about to break protocol and call you myself." She opened a file on her desk. "Your son Ethan has been in and out of here for the past 2 months. It started with him trying to get a line of credit against the ranch's value. Then he tried to add his name as a primary account holder to your checking and savings. Last week, he brought in a copy of a power of attorney and insisted he had the right to transfer the entire balance of your savings into a new account under his name." My heart hammered in my chest, but my face remained a calm mask. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. Sarah smiled, a small, tight smile of professional satisfaction. "We told him no. Each and every time. Years ago, after Robert passed, you came in and put a specific security protocol on your accounts. A verbal password, Sweetgrass Creek, and a mandatory in-person confirmation from you for any transaction over $5,000 or any changes to account ownership." Ethan got very agitated, she said, choosing her words carefully. "He insisted the power of attorney overrode everything. He even threatened to bring a lawyer. We told him he was welcome to. But our bank policy was designed to protect our clients, especially from situations exactly like this. My late husband, my wise Robert, he had insisted on those protocols. 'You're too trusting, Elle,' he used to say, his hand over mine. 'Your heart is too big. A little caution never hurt anyone.' Thank God in heaven I had listened to him. 'Sarah,' I said, my voice firm and unwavering, 'I am here today to revoke that power of attorney, effective immediately and permanently. I want to change every password, every security question. I want to put a freeze on everything. No one, and I mean no one, accesses these accounts or gets any information about them without me sitting right here in this chair, with you as a witness.' An hour later, I walked out of that bank feeling like I had just put on a suit of armor. Every dollar I had ever earned, every penny Robert and I had saved, was now locked down tighter than Fort Knox. They couldn't touch a single cent. Our next stop was Mr. Miller's office. The irony was not lost on me that I was walking into the very same building where Jessica had hatched her treacherous plan. Mr. Miller was an old-school lawyer, a man whose handshake was his bond and who had been fishing buddies with my husband for 40 years. His office smelled of old books, leather, and integrity. He listened intently as I laid out the whole sordid story, from the whispers Carol had overheard to the green folder and the sick chickens. Carol sat beside me, nodding, a silent, supportive pillar of strength. When I was finished, Mr. Miller took off his glasses and polished them slowly with a handkerchief, a habit he had when he was deep in thought. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave and rumbling like distant thunder, "this is worse than I thought. This is a classic, textbook case of elder fraud and what the law calls undue influence and emotional coercion." He explained that the power of attorney I signed was likely invalid in the eyes of the court. "You were pressured, you were deliberately misled. You were not of a sound mind to understand the full implications because of their deception. And you had no independent legal counsel. A judge would tear this fraudulent document to shreds. Those words were the most beautiful music I had ever heard. But we don't want it to get to a judge just yet, he continued, his eyes glinting. First we fight fire with fire. We build a fortress around you so high and so strong they can't even get close. For the next 2 hours his office became a war room. He drafted a flurry of documents with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. A formal revocation of power of attorney, so airtight and legally fortified it couldn't be challenged. A cease and desist letter addressed to Ethan, Jessica, and Sharon, warning them of severe legal consequences if they attempted to contact me or access my assets. And most importantly, we started restructuring my will and the entire inheritance. Let's be very clear about your wishes, Eleanor, he said, looking at me over his spectacles, his pen poised. This ranch, this legacy, where do you want it to go? And for the first time I felt a spark of something beyond just anger or self-preservation. I felt purpose. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with the life I had just fought to take back. I left his office with a thick manila envelope in my hands. It felt heavier than any folder, but this time it was the weight of power, not of defeat. On the drive home, I looked out at the rolling hills and wide-open sky of my home, of my land. I was seeing it with new eyes. The eyes of a fighter. The eyes of a survivor. I had taken back control. I had rebuilt my fortress walls and I had sharpened my weapons. You know, when you spend your entire life looking after other people, raising a son, caring for a husband, you forget how to look after yourself. Sitting in Mr. Miller's office that day, I felt like I was remembering who Eleanor Miller truly was. I wasn't just a mother or a widow. I was a force to be reckoned with. And when the phone finally rang the next day, with my son's panic screams echoing from sunny California, I was ready. After I hung up on Ethan's stunned silence, the old house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the charged stillness of a battlefield after the first cannon has been fired. I knew it was his opponent's turn to move, and I didn't have to wait long. I went about my chores, feeding the chickens, the healthy, thriving ones, and watering my tomato plants, my hands steady, my mind clear. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Caller ID showed Ethan's cell. I let it ring 3 times, a small act of control before picking up. Eleanor. It was Jessica. Her voice was an ocean of syrupy sweetness, the same cloying tone she used when she wanted something. It was the voice that had convinced me to sign the green folder. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. Hi, honey. Listen, I think there's been some kind of terrible mistake with the bank. Ethan's in a bit of a panic, you know how he gets. He must have misunderstood you. I sat down at my solid oak kitchen table, my back straight as a fence post. There's no mistake, Jessica. And he understood me perfectly. A beat of charged silence. The sweetness in her voice curdled, like milk left out in the sun. What do you mean? Of course there is. The cards aren't working. We tried all of them. It must be some kind of fraud alert or something. You need to call them and clear it up. I know the cards aren't working, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. It was a tool, nothing more. I'm the one who turned them off. The silence on her end was longer this time. I could practically hear the gears in her head grinding as the mask of polite concern dropped away, replaced by the cold, hard calculation I now knew so well. Her little game was over, and she was realizing it. You did what? She stammered, the pretense of a doting daughter-in-law completely gone. Her voice was sharp, brittle. Why on earth would you do that? We're on vacation. You're ruining our vacation. Is that what you're calling it? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. A vacation? I thought it might be a business trip. You know, scouting out those real estate developers for my ranch? Or perhaps you were visiting potential retirement homes. I hear the ones in Billings are lovely this time of year, though I imagine they require a hefty deposit. Money you no longer have access to. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp. It was the satisfying sound of a liar being caught, of their carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica was speechless. The phone rustled and a new voice came on the line. Harsher. Older. Dripping with condescension. It was her mother, Sharon. Eleanor, this is Sharon. I think you're being utterly hysterical and frankly very selfish. Jessica and Ethan are worried sick about you. your memory, your state of mind. This impulsive, irrational action is proving our point entirely. A woman your age shouldn't be handling these kinds of financial pressures. There it was. The narrative. The story they had been weaving for months, for the benefit of lawyers and bankers and anyone who would listen. Poor, confused, senile Eleanor. A danger to herself and her own finances. I almost laughed. My mind is clearer than it has been in years, Sharon, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm that could have frozen the line between us. It's amazing how clear things become when you realize your family is a nest of vipers, whispering poison in your ear. Now you listen to me, Sharon snapped, her condescending tone turning to pure venom. You are an old woman alone on that huge property. It's a liability. It's dangerous. You need to be cared for. What we are doing, what we have been planning, is for your own good. It's to secure your future. For my own good? I finally did laugh, a short, bitter, humorless sound. Let me tell you what's dangerous, Sharon. What's dangerous is signing papers without reading them because you trust your own family. What's dangerous is trusting that your own son wouldn't plot to steal your home, your entire life, right out from under you. But you know what's truly stupendously dangerous, Sharon? It's having a loud, self-satisfied conversation about selling a woman's ranch in a lawyer's office where her best friend of 30 years can sit in the corner and overhear every single treacherous word you say. Dead silence. Utter, complete, and glorious silence. I had laid all my cards on the table. The bluff had been called. There was a frantic, whispered conversation in the background, a cacophony of panic and blame, and then the line went dead. They had hung up on me. I sat there for a long moment, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. They knew that I knew. The game had changed irrevocably. They weren't just dealing with a glitch at the bank anymore. They were dealing with a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I knew they would be back. They had no money, no way to pay their exorbitant hotel bill, no way to even get gas for the car to drive all the way home from California. They would have to come crawling back, their tails between their legs. They would be angry, desperate, and probably more dangerous than ever. But as I looked around my quiet, peaceful kitchen, I felt a strength flowing back into me. This house was no longer just the place I lived. It was my fortress now, and I was waiting for them. They arrived 2 days later at dusk, just as the sky was turning a bruised purple over the mountains. The shiny luxury SUV was covered in a layer of grime, and it limped up my long gravel driveway like a wounded animal. I was sitting on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching them come. I had spent the past 2 days not in fear, but in preparation. I was ready. The chessboard was set and it was my move. They got out of the car, a miserable-looking trio of defeated conspirators. Ethan's face was pale and drawn, his expensive vacation clothes rumpled and stained. Jessica's eyes were red and swollen from crying, tears of rage and frustration, not remorse, I was sure of it. And Sharon, her designer sunglasses couldn't hide the tight, furious set of her jaw. She looked like a queen whose kingdom had just been overthrown. They stood there in the yard for a long moment, a tableau of thwarted greed. They seemed to be expecting me to rush out, wringing my hands, offering comfort, asking what was wrong. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Even the crickets in the tall grass seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the storm to break. Finally, Ethan took a hesitant step forward, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Mom," he started. His voice strained as he tried to sound reasonable and calm. "We need to talk about this. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "Oh, I understand perfectly, Ethan," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the cool evening air. I didn't get up from the swing. I made him approach me. "I understand that you plan to sell my home, my legacy, the land your grandfather broke his back to cultivate, to some developer from out of state. I understand that you and your wife had already picked out a nice, convenient nursing home to dump me in while you lived off the profits of my life. I understand everything." Jessica flinched as if I'd slapped her across the face. "That's not true," she cried, her voice cracking with a performance of wounded innocence. "We were just exploring options. For your future. We were worried about you being all alone out here. We love you." "Worried?" I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The simple act felt like an exercise of immense power. You weren't worried when you left me here to tend to this whole ranch by myself while you went to sip margaritas in Santa Barbara. You weren't worried when you deliberately bought the wrong feed that poisoned my prize-winning chickens, just to make me think I was incompetent and losing my grip. Ethan's face went chalk white. He shot a panicked look at Jessica. He knew in that moment that I knew everything. The small cruelties, the carefully planned sabotage. Not just the big plan but all the little insidious steps they took to get there. It was Sharon who stepped forward then, her patience gone. She took charge, her voice dripping with authority. All right, that's enough of this melodrama, Eleanor. This is beneath you. You have made your point. You're upset. We get it. Now be a reasonable adult, unlock the accounts. We can all sit down and sort out the details of a proper management plan for your assets later. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it left me breathless for a second. Even now, caught red-handed in their lies, they still thought they were in control. They still thought they could manage me, manage my life, manage my money. That's when Jessica lost it. Her carefully constructed facade of a loving daughter-in-law shattered into a million pieces, revealing the snarling, vicious creature beneath. A management plan? She shrieked, her voice raw and ugly, echoing across the quiet yard. I'll tell you the plan. The plan is you sign the damn papers like you're supposed to. You are just a stubborn, senile old woman. You have no idea what's good for you. God, we should have had you declared incompetent and put you in that home months ago. There it was. The raw, unfiltered truth of her heart. The venom she'd been hiding behind her sweet smiles and concerned glances for years. Ethan looked horrified, not at her vile words, but at the fact that she'd said them out loud, destroying any chance they had of salvaging the situation through manipulation. He tried to shush her, grabbing her arm, but it was too late. The words were out, hanging in the air between us like poison gas. I set my glass down on the small table beside me with a soft, definitive click. Slowly I rose from the swing. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I looked at each of them, at the naked greed in Sharon's eyes, the viciousness in Jessica's, and the weak, cowardly betrayal in the face of my own son. Thank you, Jessica, I said, my voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that made them all fall silent. Thank you for making this next part so very easy for me. I turned and walked back into the house without another word. I could hear them whispering furiously behind me. What is she doing now? Go after her, Ethan. Don't just stand there. I returned a moment later, holding a thick manila envelope. The one from Mr. Miller's office. My Declaration of Independence. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at them as if they were insects. You want to talk about plans? I said. Let's talk about my plan. I opened the flap of the envelope and pulled out the first document with a flourish. First, this is a legally binding restraining order, prohibiting any of you from setting foot on my property, contacting me, or accessing my financial assets in any way, effective immediately. Mr. Miller filed it with the county court this morning. Their jaws dropped in unison. Second, I continued, my voice gaining strength as I pulled out another sheaf of papers. This is my new last will and testament. I've made some significant changes to the inheritance. In fact, I've disinherited you completely, Ethan. This entire ranch, the house, the savings, every last penny. It's all being left to a new foundation I've established. I paused, letting them hang on my every word. A foundation to provide legal aid and support for elderly parents who are being financially abused by their own children. The color drained from their faces. It was a spectacular sight. From red with anger to white with shock, and finally to a sickly mottled gray of utter absolute defeat. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no. I had saved the best for last. Ethan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. You can't. He finally stammered, the words catching in his throat. I'm your son. Your only son. The inheritance. It's my birthright. It's the family legacy. A birthright is earned, Ethan. Not stolen, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the Montana bedrock beneath my feet. And a legacy is something you honor. Not something you liquidate for a quick payday. You forfeited your right to both the moment you decided my home was worth more than your mother. Sharon, ever the pragmatist, was the first to recover her voice, though it was shrill with panic. This is ridiculous. You're clearly not in your right mind, Eleanor. We'll contest it. We'll tell the court you're incompetent, that you're being manipulated by that busybody neighbor of yours. The power of attorney you signed, that will prove we were only trying to help. You mean this power of attorney? I said, my voice dripping with disdain. I reached back into my large manila envelope and pulled out the infamous green folder. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage. The one you had me sign under false pretenses without legal representation, telling me it was for insurance? Mr. Miller, my lawyer, seemed to think the correct legal term for that is fraud. He was very, very interested to see it. With a flick of my wrist, I let the folder drop from my fingers. It fluttered to the porch floor, landing with a soft, pathetic thud, a symbol of their failed coup. And as for my competency, I continued, looking directly at Sharon, my gaze unwavering. My personal doctor gave me a full cognitive evaluation yesterday afternoon. Funny how quickly you can get an appointment when your lawyer calls ahead. I passed with flying colors. Mr. Miller has the certified report. He also has a sworn affidavit from my dear friend Carol, detailing the entire conversation she overheard at his office. He seems to think that between the fraudulent document and the witness testimony, we have a very clear picture of a conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen. Every word was a nail being hammered into their coffin. I could see the panic rising in their eyes, turning to sheer terror as every escape route they had imagined was systematically and brutally blocked off. They had underestimated me. They had seen a frail old woman, a relic to be managed and disposed of, and they had missed the iron spine beneath the wrinkles. They had forgotten that this was the same woman who had faced down blizzards, droughts, and bank foreclosures to keep this ranch alive. They were amateurs and they had picked a fight with a professional survivor. But I had one final surprise. One last turn of the screw. You know, I said, my voice taking on a conversational, almost thoughtful tone, as if an interesting thought had just occurred to me. Mr. Miller and I had a long and very educational talk about your actions over the past few months. He used a lot of legal terms I didn't quite understand. But there was one phrase that really stuck with me. I paused, letting the suspense build, watching the sweat bead on Ethan's forehead. Elder fraud. The words hung in the twilight air, heavy and menacing. He told me that what you attempted to do wasn't just a simple family squabble over an inheritance. I went on, my gaze moving from Ethan to Jessica to Sharon, pinning each of them in turn. He explained that conspiring to fraudulently seize the assets of a person over the age of 65 is a felony in the state of Montana. A serious felony. He said the district attorney's office takes a very, very dim view of such things. Apparently, they like to make examples out of people who prey on their own parents. I let that sink in. Their faces were a mask of abject horror. This had gone far beyond losing a potential payday. This had just crossed the line into a world of police, prosecutors, and potential prison sentences. This was real. I have a copy of all these documents, of course, I said, tapping the large envelope still clutched in my hand. The doctor's report, Carol's affidavit, the bank records showing your repeated attempts to access my funds. And I had Mr. Miller forward another complete copy to Sheriff Brody's office this afternoon. Just to have it on file, you understand. For my protection. That was the final blow. The checkmate. The fear that flashed across their faces was real and visceral. It wasn't the fear of being poor. It was the fear of being caught, of public humiliation, of actual life-altering consequences for their vile actions. Jessica was the first to break. The fight was completely gone from her. She grabbed Ethan's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve, her voice a terrified whisper. Let's go. Ethan, we have to go now. Sharon, for once in her life, was utterly silent. She just stared at me, her mask of superiority finally shattered, revealing the pathetic, greedy, frightened woman underneath. Ethan looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, searching for a sign of the mother he had known, the woman who would have fixed this for him. But she was gone. He was looking at a stranger. Get off my land, I said, my voice low and final, each word dropping like a stone. Now, before I decide to make that phone call to the sheriff and ask him to come enforce this restraining order personally. That was all it took. They scrambled back into the SUV like rats fleeing a burning barn. They didn't even bother to close the doors properly before Ethan slammed his foot on the gas. The car fishtailed in the gravel, kicking up a thick cloud of dust that momentarily obscured them from view. A final pathetic act of defiance. And then they were gone. As the dust settled and the sound of their engine faded into the vast Montana quiet, a profound silence fell over the ranch. A chapter of my life, a long and painful one, had just slammed shut. I had thought that in this moment, I might feel a wave of sadness, of loss for the son I once had. But I didn't. I felt nothing but the steady, quiet hum of freedom. A new life was waiting for me, and I was finally ready to build it. The days that followed were the quietest and the most productive of my entire life. The house, which had felt empty and oppressive with their toxic presence, now felt spacious and full of golden possibility. The very first thing I did was call Tom Peterson, a local contractor I'd known since he was a boy. The roof that had been leaking for a year, the one Ethan always promised to fix with a sigh and a, "I'll get to it, Mom," was completely replaced in a week. The porch steps he'd called rickety were torn out and replaced with solid oak that felt firm and trustworthy under my feet. I had the whole house repainted inside and out, in cheerful shades of buttercup yellow and cream. I was washing away their memory one deliberate, joyful brushstroke at a time. With my finances secure and entirely under my own control, I finally had the freedom to invest in the ranch again. But not just in more cattle or another field of hay. I had an idea, a little seed of a plan that I'd nurtured in the back of my mind for years, a dream that had always been dismissed by Jessica as a silly little hobby, and by Ethan as not worth the effort. I started with the Saturday farmers market in our small town. I woke at 4 a.m., the house dark and quiet, and felt a thrill of excitement, not dread. I baked my grandmother's recipes for spiced apple butter, wild chokecherry jam, peach preserves, and crusty sourdough bread. The recipes were in my bones, the motions familiar and comforting. Carol came over to help, her tiny kitchen suddenly a command center of bubbling canning jars, rising dough, and the warm, sweet smells of my childhood. That first Saturday, we loaded up my old Ford pickup and set up a simple folding table. We were nervous. What if no one bought anything? What if I was just a foolish old woman with a silly hobby after all? We sold out completely by 10 a.m. A line had formed at our little table. People were hungry for something real, something homemade with care. The next week we brought twice as much and sold out again. People started calling my little stall Eleanor's Homestead Pantry. The name stuck. Felt right. A few weeks later, the owner of the local grocery store, a man who had tasted my chokecherry jam, asked if he could carry my preserves. Then a fancy new cafe that opened in the next town over wanted to buy my sourdough bread, exclusively for their sandwiches. It wasn't a whirlwind, overnight success story. It was slow, steady, hard work. It was getting up before dawn, my hands aching from kneading dough, my back sore from standing over a hot stove for hours. There were setbacks. A whole batch of strawberry jam that didn't set properly. A batch of bread that refused to rise. But every challenge was mine to solve. Every small victory was mine to celebrate. The profits, after I paid for supplies and a fair wage for Carol, were mine. The decisions were mine. The deep, bone-weary satisfaction at the end of a long day was all mine. I quickly realized I couldn't do it alone if I wanted to grow. I thought of two women in town, Marianne and Susan, both widows like me, who I knew were struggling to make ends meet on their small pensions. I drove to their homes and offered them a job. A real job with a fair salary, set hours, and paid time off. The looks on their faces, the mix of surprise and tearful gratitude, were worth more than any profit. My kitchen, once the silent stage for my family's drama, was now filled with the sound of women laughing, sharing stories, and working together. The house was alive again, humming with purpose and friendship. We talked about our children, our late husbands, our hopes for the future. We weren't just employees, we were a team, a sisterhood. People often think that when you reach 73, your life is essentially over. You're in the epilogue, just waiting for the final page to turn. But for me, it felt like I was just getting to the most exciting chapter. Every jar of jam we sealed, every loaf of bread we baked wasn't just food. It was a declaration of independence. It was proof that I was more than just a mother, more than just a widow, more than just an old woman to be managed. I was a businesswoman. I was a creator. I was valuable. 6 months flew by in a blur of flour, sugar, and newfound purpose. The business was thriving. I had paid for all the repairs, invested in new commercial-grade kitchen equipment, and still had a healthy savings account that was growing every week. I was happy. Truly deeply, peacefully happy. I had thought the chapter with Ethan and his wife was closed forever. A painful memory I was successfully burying under a mountain of success and jam. I thought I would never have to see him again. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves on the cottonwood trees were turning a brilliant gold, a dusty, beat-up pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled up to my front gate and stopped. And my heart, for the first time in half a year, stopped with it. A man got out of the truck. It took me a long moment to recognize him. It was Ethan, but not the son I knew. This wasn't the man in the designer polo shirt who had left me behind without a second thought. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by worn, stained jeans and a faded work shirt that hung loosely on his thinner frame. He was gaunt, his face shadowed by a scruffy beard, his hair unkempt. He looked broken. Defeated by a world that hadn't turned out to be as easy to conquer as he'd thought. He didn't try to open the gate. He didn't call out. He just stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking at the ranch. He looked at the new roof gleaming in the afternoon sun, the freshly painted white porch, the cheerful flower boxes overflowing with fall mums that I'd installed. He looked like a ghost visiting a life he no longer belonged to. A life that had moved on and flourished without him. I was in the new commercial kitchen, a small building we built next to the house, tasting a batch of spiced pear butter. Marian saw the truck first. "Eleanor," she said softly, "there's someone at the gate." I walked to the window and my stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. I wiped my hands on my apron, my mind a whirlwind of old anger and a new unwelcome flicker of something else. I walked out of the kitchen across the yard and stood on the porch. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I would not make the first move. He finally saw me. He flinched as if he hadn't expected me to appear. He took a half-step back before catching himself. "Mom," he said, his voice rough and scratchy, as if he hadn't used it much lately. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the gravel at his feet, kicking at a loose stone with the toe of his worn-out work boot. I came to apologize. I remained silent. Apologies were just words. I had learned the hard way that his words were worthless, shifting and changing to suit his needs. I'd had enough of his empty words to last a lifetime. I needed to see, not hear. He took my silence as permission to continue. He took a deep, shaky breath, the whole sorry story tumbling out of him in a rushed, ashamed torrent. Jessica had left him. The moment the reality set in that there was no inheritance, no payday from the ranch, no easy life funded by my life savings, she was gone. She cleaned out what was left of their joint checking account and took off with some guy she'd met online. The divorce was finalized last month. As for Sharon, her other children, seeing that she no longer had access to my money and was now a financial burden herself, had promptly placed her in a state-run nursing facility. The irony was so thick and bitter I could have choked on it. They had reaped exactly what they had sown. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said, finally forcing himself to look up at me. His eyes were hollow, haunted. "No money. No forgiveness. I know I don't deserve any of it. I had to tell you. I'm leaving Montana for good. I got a construction job lined up in Oregon starting next week. I couldn't leave without saying I'm sorry." I looked at the man standing before me. He wasn't the slick, confident son who had condescended to me. He wasn't the screaming, panicked man on the phone. He was a stranger, a man who had gambled everything on his own greed and lost spectacularly. He had been humbled by life in the harshest way possible. A part of me, the cold, angry part that I had nurtured for the past 6 months, wanted to turn my back, walk inside and lock the door. Let him leave. Let him disappear forever and take his poison with him. But another part of me, a deeply buried, ancient part that I thought had died, saw something else. It saw the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, his face streaked with tears. The boy I had loved with every fiber of my being. The boy I had dreamed a whole future for. He was gone, replaced by this broken man, but a flicker of him was still there in those haunted eyes. A flicker of loss, of regret, of a child who had lost his way home. I took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. It smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. And I said something that surprised even myself. the words leaving my mouth before I had even truly formed them in my mind. Are you hungry? The question hung in the cool autumn air between us, simple and profound. Ethan looked stunned, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. He just blinked at me, his hollow eyes filled with confusion. He had probably expected yelling accusations, a slammed door. He had not expected this. I asked if you were hungry, I repeated, my voice even, giving away nothing of the turmoil inside me. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. He gave a small jerky nod, unable to speak. Yeah, he finally croaked, his voice raspy. Yeah, Mom. I am. I turned without another word and went inside, my mind a whirlwind. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't letting him back into my life. But I couldn't let a dog starve on my doorstep, and whatever he was now, he was still a human being. I went into the main kitchen and packed up a plate of the leftover roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green beans from the lunch I'd shared with the ladies. I added a thick slice of the sourdough bread we'd baked that morning and filled a tall glass with cold water from the tap. I walked back out and passed the plate and glass through the bars of the wrought iron gate. Eat this, I said, my voice flat. Then you should go. He didn't argue. He didn't ask to come in. He just took the plate with a hand that trembled slightly, slid down to the ground with his back against the gatepost, and ate. He ate like a man who hadn't seen a real home-cooked meal in weeks, maybe months. I watched him from the porch, a strange, unwelcome ache in my chest. When he was done, he carefully placed the empty plate and glass by the gate, like an offering. He stood up, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. Thank you, he said. He looked at me then, a desperate, flickering hope in his eyes. If I work, if I pay back what I tried to take, if I prove that I'm not that person anymore, could I call you? I thought long and hard, the silence stretching between us. Forgiveness felt impossible, a bridge too far. But the idea of him disappearing forever, a broken man heading to a lonely life with this gaping wound between us, didn't feel right either. It felt like an ending but not a resolution. Trust is like a tree, Ethan, I said finally, the words coming to me from a place I didn't know I had. You didn't just break a branch. You took an axe and chopped it down to the stump. If you want it to grow back, you have to tend to it. From nothing. With actions, not words. With work, not apologies. He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He seemed to accept the monumental task I had laid before him. I will, he whispered. And then he got in his truck and drove away. I truly thought that was the last I'd see of him. A final strange farewell. But 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, my phone rang. It's Ethan, he said, his voice hesitant. I didn't leave for Oregon. I got a job with a construction crew here in town. I was wondering, the fence by the south pasture, I know it's been needing repairs for years. Could I come by on Sunday and fix it? No pay. I want to do something. And so it began. The long, arduous road to redemption. Every other Sunday he would come. He never came to the house. He would park his beat-up truck by the gate and work on whatever project he had set for himself. He fixed the fence. He reshingled the roof of the old barn. He cleared the irrigation ditch that had been clogged for a decade. He worked for hours under the hot sun or in the bitter wind, never stopping, never complaining. I would leave a plate of food and a jug of water for him on the gatepost. He would eat and then he would leave. We barely spoke more than a few words. For months this was our routine. A silent, strange penance. He was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding the physical structures of the ranch he had tried to destroy. And maybe, just maybe, he was rebuilding something else too. One day, almost a year after he had started his silent work, he showed up holding a formal-looking document. It was a paycheck stub from his construction job, and tucked behind it was a money order for $5,000. It's a start, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he pushed it through the gate. To paying you back. I looked at the money order. It represented a year of back-breaking labor, of living in a cheap rented room and saving every penny. It was more than just money, it was proof. And in that moment I knew what I had to do. I pushed the money order back to him. I don't want your money, Ethan. His face fell. The business, it's growing, I said. I need a driver. someone to handle the deliveries, to pick up heavy supplies. It's hard work, and the salary isn't what you're used to, but it's an honest job. I looked him straight in the eye. Do you want it? He stared at me, his eyes filling with tears. Not the manipulative tears of before, but the raw, grateful tears of a man being offered a lifeline. He just nodded over and over again. That Monday he started work. Our relationship was completely redefined. I was his boss. He was my employee. I paid him a weekly salary. He called me Eleanor. And for another year he worked. He never missed a day. He never complained. He never crossed a boundary. One afternoon, I called him into the small office I'd set up. I had a document waiting on the desk, drafted by Mr. Miller. I want to offer you the position of ranch manager, I said. It comes with more responsibility and a significant promotion. This is a formal employment contract. Your duties, my expectations, the terms of termination. Everything is business. He read the contract, his hands shaking slightly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. This was more than a job. It was a testament of trust. He signed it. As he pushed it back across the desk, he hesitated. So, he said, his voice barely audible. Does this mean? Can I call you Mom again? I looked at my son, the real one, the one who had fought his way back from the abyss. I saw the remorse, but for the first time I also saw the strength I had always hoped was there. And I smiled. A real warm smile. Yes, Ethan, I said. I think you've earned that. 5 years have passed since that day. It feels like another lifetime ago, a story about someone else. Eleanor's Homestead Pantry is no longer just a local business. It's a regional success. We have our beloved storefront in town, but our products are now shipped to specialty food stores in 5 different states. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude, is now a hub of activity, more prosperous and full of life than it has ever been. I am 78 years old now, and I wouldn't trade these last few years for anything. I am the founder and the CEO, the heart and soul of this business, the final word on every new recipe. But Ethan is its backbone. As ranch manager, he has worked with a quiet, tireless dedication that has earned him the respect of every person we employ. He has never once overstepped, never once questioned my authority, never once acted with anything but the utmost professionalism and a deep, abiding respect. Our relationship isn't what it was before the betrayal. It can never be that innocent again. Something different. It's stronger. It's not built on the blind obligation of a mother and child. It's forged in the fires of mutual respect, hard-won trust, and a shared purpose. We are partners in every sense of the word. The foundation I established in that moment of righteous fury has become my greatest passion, and I think my truest legacy. The small cottage on the property, once meant for guests, is now Eleanor's haven. A temporary safe house for parents who have found themselves in the same nightmare I escaped. We offer them shelter, connect them with pro bono legal resources from lawyers like Mr. Miller, and most importantly, we offer them a job in the business if they need it. We give them a chance to stand on their own 2 feet, to reclaim their power and their salary, just as I did. Ethan is the foundation's biggest supporter, anonymously donating a significant portion of his salary every single month. He says it's his way of turning the worst thing he ever did into something good, of balancing the scales of his own past. Most evenings, Carol and I still sit on the porch, our ritual unchanged by the passage of years. Ethan often joins us for dinner after his long workday is done. The oppressive silence that once haunted this ranch is gone forever, replaced by the happy hum of a life well lived, a business well run, and a family. A real family, forged by choice and hard work, rebuilt from the ashes. My story could have ended in a sterile room in a nursing home in Billings. It could have ended with me as a forgotten woman whose entire life and legacy were stolen and squandered. Could have been a tragedy, but it wasn't. The greatest betrayal of my life, the most profound pain a mother can endure, became my greatest liberation. It was a crucible that burned away the gentle, accommodating woman I was and revealed the strong, resilient woman I was always meant to be. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. It forced me to fight for myself, to build a life on my own terms, not on the terms dictated by others. That horrible, painful chapter taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for others, is to draw a hard line in the sand. to say no more. It taught me that it is never ever too late to reclaim your worth, to rewrite your own story, to build your own empire. Even if it's an empire made of jam and bread. Thank you for listening to my journey tonight. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe in the power of telling our stories, of shining a light into the dark corners of family life that so many of us are taught to keep hidden. So many of us suffer these silent heartbreaks behind closed doors, feeling alone and ashamed. My question for you is, have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to choose between keeping a false peace and fighting for your own dignity? I'd be honored to read your experiences and your wisdom in the comments below. Your story matters. If my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories of strength and survival. Remember, no matter how dark it gets, you are not alone.